Sandro found Akko to be very businesslike and full of life. There was a certain purpose in her movements as they began and ended in an orderly fashion. The way her fingers raised when she pointed at things. The way she made her way across the hallways and classrooms. The way she would occasionally glance back at him to make sure he was keeping pace. Each and every movement was so impressive that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Akko showed him to his homeroom, Class C of the 11th grade. The room certainly displayed more of a human touch than the previous meeting room, but Sanjuro was none the wiser as to its function. Aoko gave a brief explanation before they visited individual subject classrooms, as well as the gym, cafeteria, locker room, and school infirmary. Sanjuro asked so many questions that much time passed before they reached the AV room on the second floor. Sanjuro stopped, looking genuinely concerned.
20分経つと1時だ。
え？嘘でしょ？うちの校舎そんな広くないわよ。
The tour had begun around 10, which meant that 3 hours had passed. A tour of a school shouldn't take anywhere near this long.
そうだったわね。行く先々で根掘り葉掘り聞かれちゃ、そりゃ何時間でも経つわ。
Aoko glared at Sanjuro. She was being sarcastic, of course, knowing full well he would never pick up on it. Is he? Uh-oh. To her surprise, he looked down apologetically, unable to hide his dejection.
なんだこいつ。ちゃんとしてるっちゃ。
The guy before her now was nothing like earlier. In contrast to seeing his once impenetrable veneer, when they first met, she found herself feeling sympathetic. Momentarily, at least, until her irritation returned in full force.
で、何がまずいの？覚えることが多すぎてパンクしたなんて言わないでね。
いや、それもあるけど、学校のことは別にして、1時になるとまずいんだ。
Sanjuro's gaze wandered as if worried about something. If he was worried about the weather, he would have a hard time seeing it, seeing it as there were no windows in this hallway.
へえ、時間を気にするってことは用事があるのね。そう。人の予定を引っかき回しておいて、自分だけ好きなようにやろうって言うんだ。なんだ、顔に似合わずいい人ね、君。
いや、褒めても何も出ないぞ。
誰も褒めちゃいないわよ。
She yelled at him, hold back her fury, of course.
で？
それで、一体何の用なの？
Sanjuro's face lit up as he finally understood what she was asking.
そこは秘密にしておきたい。
He said with a perfectly straight face, of course he did.
始めたつもりだったけど、こいつのこういったテンポには失神しそうに。
Her frustration was natural. Still, she did everything she could to stifle her feelings and fake a smile.
しずきくん？
She took a step forward.
秘密だってば。
Feeling the mood change drastically, Sanjuro took a step back. And another, and another. No matter how many steps he took back, she kept edging toward him. She was smiling, but he thought he could see the blood boiling beneath her skin.
これ、最後の質問にしとくわね。あなた、私をからかって楽しい？
He had no intention of mocking her, though. At this point, he doubted presenting any evidence to prove this would do much to erase that forced smile on her face.
説明する。
His arm raised in surrender. She halted her advance and freed her face from that unseemly smile.
実は1時からアルバイトがあるんだ。でも、ここはそういうの禁止なんだろ？
そうだけど、あ、禁止されてるから秘密にしようと思ったの？バカね。それなら許可さえ下りていれば問題ないわよ。
バカね。
知ってる。試験の時に許可をもらってる。
へえ。
Ako's face lit up when she realized he might not be piece of work she thought him to be. Yet,
しかし許可は一つしかもらえなかった。
一つって、あなた掛け持ちでバイトしてるの？
これでも2件減らしたんだ。生活費だけで大変なのに学費まで稼がなくちゃいけない。なのに働き先は一つだけというのはあんまりだと思わないか。
いや、あんまりなのはあなたの方だと思うけど。
though still irritated, her opinion of him changed a little. She was impressed that he was able to take care of his tuition and living expenses all on his own. She could also empathize with having no time to oneself. Her anger began to subside. The words part-time job were about the last thing she ever expected to hear out of this country boy's mouth.
そういうことなら仕方ないわね。いいわ、行きなさいよ。事情は分かったから。
青崎はいいのか？
She had no idea what his question meant, but she at least understood he was trying to be considerate, which also took her by surprise. She figured he'd be just as dense about people's feelings as he was about everything else.
別に、私もこのまま帰るから。
First, though, she thought it best if they both stopped by the faculty room. Mr. Yamashiro had mentioned that transfer procedures had already been completed, so all that remained was for him to sign off on her duties.
先生、案内終わりました。
それはお疲れ様。しずきくんもお疲れ様。それで校舎を回った感想はどうかな？
ありがとうございます。なんというかとても学校ですね。
そうかそうか。うん、明日から頑張りなさい。
She had no interest whatsoever in this pointless wrap-up meeting.
山城先生のことは気にしないでいいわ。教え子に厄介なことを押し付けてふんぞり返っているぐらい職員室が好きなんだから、何時間でも待ってるでしょ。いえ、待ってるべきじゃない？
そうか。青崎がいいんならいいんだな。
There it was again. Where Sanjiro was getting at, Aoko had no idea.
それじゃあ行くよ。今日はありがとう。
今日だけよ、今日だけ。
She shooed him away with her hand. His face bent into a broad smile, as if he found the gesture endearing. It was a softer expression than she had grown accustomed to seeing out of him. It was the kind of smile that would make anyone smile back. Well, most people, at least. Aoko Agzaki didn't betray the slightest hint of a smile.
それじゃあまた。
And with that friendly farewell, Sanjiro walked towards the end of the hallway. Or so she thought before he turned into the next class over. Sanjiro headed straight for one of the classroom's windows. Whereupon he opened it with ease. The chilling November air filled the room with a soft sound of the rain doubled in volume. In that instant, she realized his intention was opening the window. She really wished she hadn't.
いや、待て待て待て！
He already had one leg out the window when she dashed to stop him.
何するつもりよ、あんたは！
何ってアルバイトに行くんだけど。
その窓は人が出入りするところじゃないの。だいたいここ何階だと思ってるの？
She saw the light of understanding dawn in his eyes.
死ぬところだった。2階から降りたら危なすぎる。
危ないのはあんたの頭。
Her insult went right over his head.
あのね、こっちじゃ窓から人は出入りしないの。さっき言っとくべきだったわ。
知ってるよ。時間がないんで慌ててたんだ。ありがとう。これからは気をつける。
He pulled his leg back inside and closed the window. His school uniform was soaking wet from the rain.
いいけど、私は別に。あなたがどこから外に出ようが関係ないもの。それより、あなた。
来るよ。不安だけど案内してもらったし。
He bid her farewell before running away down the hallway. She hoped he would walk down the stairs and leave through the school entrance like a normal person.
大 丈夫なのかあんなんで。
The image of him disappearing into the distance popped into her head in spite of her ear. She had no intention of spending any more time with him, yet she felt strangely anxious. She couldn't tell if the feeling was fueled with concern or irritation. Why has she even got angry with this insignificant transfer student in the first place? A strange day with a strange transfer student resulting in strange emotions. Her face tilted as she reflected on what should have been a more enjoyable day than the irritating experience she just had.
ま、いっか。どうせこれっきりなんだし。
The sound of the rain echoed quietly all around her. The gray sky seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro and Ako were likely the only ones left at school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Ako stood in it alone. She pulled up her left sleeve. Her daintily unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock.
間合ってる。
Give me a minute, I'm going to go get a drink. Okay. She looked out the window at the grounds below. Yeah, I had to go get some water. She saw a boy in uniform running through the rain without an umbrella, a sight she must have seen before, but for whatever reason affected her far more than she wished. Akko did not stop by the faculty room before heading home. While Mr. Yamashiro off to drive her home was tempting, she decided it would ultimately be far more satisfying to ruin his day just as he had hers. She walked as quietly as she could toward the entrance and opened her bright red umbrella. As she had predicted that morning, the rain was waning in the afternoon. Again, English. At this rate, it would probably cease completely in an hour or so. The distant sunshine would likely have reached her by the time she arrived home.
ま、それも悪くないか。
Could always be worse. She shrugged her shoulders in resignation. Okay, good. She neither liked nor disliked rain, but she found herself enjoying her walk home with her red umbrella in hand. The teachers at Misaki High School weren't fond of bright colors, so Ako's red umbrella was an unusual sight. A ghost story about how the umbrella was once pure white had been making the rounds, but it featured Ako instead of a ghost. It was with that umbrella that she made her way toward Misaki Station. Misaki Private High School took its namesake from the town it was in. The area was once a sprawl of farmland and woodland, but rapid growth over the last 10 years had led to unprecedented modernization. There were some who fought to preserve Misaki's natural
残
treasures.
すことには賛成ですが、それでは残すだけになってしまうでしょう。
With those words, the mayor snuffed out the voices of the minority and ushered in a long term plan for new urban development. More than enough funds for the urban development were collected, and the unamusing town of Misaki became the largest municipal ugh, municipal ugh, God dang it. Ugh, the municipality of Misaki City in nearly 10 years, even though it lacked the modernity of neighboring Yashiogi or the elegance of Misaki Hills.
それも当然よね。どういじくってももともとが山中の宿場町だし、山ごと切り崩すって言うんなら別だけど。
Urbanization had been contained to the lowlands around the station, with most of the hill and mountains still standing as they did 10 years prior. The exhaustion of funds succeeded in protecting the old Misaki where the citizens could not. It became a truly odd suburban town welcoming an increasingly urban population with its vestiges of old country charm. Misaki High School was a private school established long before the town's current state. The original campus, built 50 years ago, was located high up in the mountains, making its current location its second incarnation. The path to the old grounds was not only steep and remote, but had become an overgrown game trail with the passage of time. For these reasons, among others, Misaki High School had been shuttered until almost 20 years ago when it received a donation from a department store chain that allowed for the construction of a new campus in the city. And thus, Misaki High School reopened its doors, the old woodland campus forgotten. In fact, most of the students attending Misaki High School were not from Misaki at all. The hardly rustic people in this country town preferred professional schools to private ones. Truth be told, Aoko herself was one of them. All she had wanted after junior high was to move to Tokyo, where she hoped to spend her days tutoring her favorite bands on her way to entering. Sorry, her spend her days touring her favorite bands on her way to entering a public university. But her hopes were dashed with her sister's departure, so here she was walking alone in town with only a rent umbrella to keep her company on what should have been a day off.
思い返してみると、私の人生ってなんか災難続きっぽい。
Her frustration evaporated into the cold December air. It's November, not December.
でもま、いっか。退屈だけはしないわけだし。
With those words, her mood brightened a bit as she left the school in her wake. The busier part of town met her at the bottom of the gently sloping road. Misaki's train station was brand new. Once looking no prettier than an abandoned factory, it had been renovated into a multi-purpose structure with huge department stores on its east and west sides. When the department stores first opened, Aoko and her friends had been impressed with their modern feel, but in time the stores too became dated. She had no shopping to do today, so she passed them by. What she really wanted to do was rest at a cafe, but she fought the urge, knowing her roommate would never let her hear the end of it if she frittered frittered away her money. Uh oh. She looked back and blinked. For just a moment, she could have sworn she had seen someone suspicious in a red dress out of the corner of her eye. Okay. It must have been her imagination. The sixth sense chill she was experiencing down her spine was a familiar one at this point. She continued her walk home, brushing off the event as if it had never happened. And in time, the chill faded, and all that was left was the sounds of the town. She sighed heavily. Had she imagined it? Even if it had been in her head, she was far from comfortable with the feeling that still lingered.
夏場の方ってもう少しこう
She grumbled under her breath. Of course.
波乱万丈、商売繁盛、諸行無常と。そうそう、忙しさに愚痴を言っても始まらないわ。
Unfortunately, summer and bugs go hand in hand. She could see how bugs could be drawn to all the sweet fruit. Oh, we must be with him. Rank with rank with grease and heat, the kitchen was closed for the time being. The lunch rush had come and gone, but one last battle remained: dinner time. Only after the evening chaos could the kitchen crew remove their white aprons and call it a day. In the midst of the war zone was a lone newcomer.
これ着るんですか？
His voice was uneasy, betraying how new he was.
気持ちはわかる。俺もどうかと思うけど、店長の言うことだから、もう笑顔で乗り越えてくれ。これも商店街の明日のためなんだとよ。本気で申し訳ないんだが、雨も止んだし、なんとか行ってきてくれないか？無事帰ってきたら晩飯おごってやっから。
His bright orange coworker clasped his hands together as if to beg for forgiveness as he saddled him with this unreasonable task. Oh no. 10 years ago, Misaki City was a town of farm and woodland. But everything had changed. The front of the station was now lined with tall, multi-story buildings, and the residential areas were seemingly full of apartment complexes. The once rustic scenery around the station had long been a thing of the past. Shigonizuka was the only place in the city that still contained vestiges of the old town, a pocket of the past inside the urban jungle. The road extended up a conspicuously high hill to an old residential district far from the hustle and bustle of the train station. Long ago, it had been considered unwise to build on high ground, so nobody lived above a certain elevation. Shionazika, sitting as it did atop a hill in the middle of town, was no exception to that conviction, and had no residences to speak of. The asphalt continued for some time, eventually giving way to a mountain road that was swallowed into a cover of trees. A lone vending machine stood to mark the boundary between town and beyond. Even the children knew that there was nothing beyond the new playground and development that so enthralled them. Well, that was not entirely true. There was nothing besides the haunted house. Oh my gosh, her house is up there. Oh, great. This is going to be fun. Aoko traversed the long slope. Below her, she could see the whole of Misaki. The symmetrical town looked like a miniature set from this height. It would look like a painting if there had been a sea next to it, but unfortunately, Misaki City was very much landlocked. While it was overcast at the moment, the scene was quite breathtaking on clear evenings. The view was one thing that made the Adora's climb worthwhile, and today she had been denied even that.
ああ、雨の日は自転車も使えないし、1日に2回ぐらいバスでも通ってくれないもんかな、ほんと。
Aoko had been using this road to get to school for almost 2 years now, but the journey had never gotten easier.
あれ、鍵閉まったまま？アリス、まだ帰ってきてないんだ。
With a wearily shrug, she put her hand on the rusty iron fence. Quietly, the heavy gate swung open as if to welcome her home. There sits atop that hill a haunted house. That is how the story, much shared around town, used to begin. But fresh rumors about the house have sprung to life almost as fast as the town's modernization. Despite being desolate and abandoned for many years, lights can be seen inside the house at night. An angry murderer crow often gathers atop the hill before mysteriously vanishing. Children get lost in the fog, never to be seen again. Late at night, a shrieking sound can be heard all the way to town. This particular police slander was the one Aoko wished to discredit the most. The final rumor was of an eye-catching luxury car that sometimes made its way up and down the hill. The rumors spread and grew by the day, and while they grew, the house that everybody thought had rotted away was restored over the recent years. Deep in a wood on top of the hill, no one dared to approach. Like a ruin shrouded from view even on the brightest of days, stood a relic of time, a building from a fairy tale. The house was the Kyoniji Mansion. Everyone in town knew about the witch's house on the hill. It was an unabashed haunted house where Ako resided, for reasons known only to her. Needless to say, it was not really haunted. The Koniji family home was the grand western style mansion with a long and storied history, stretching all the way back to England. It was telephone. Holy shit, how many notifications did I just get? It was too small to be a dormitory, yet too big to be called a house. The main building contained as many as 3 normal houses worth of rooms. It was surrounded by a large, all-encompassing courtyard. The perimeter of the grounds was surrounded by a high iron fence covered in thorny vines. There was also an annex to the main building. Given such extravagance, it was no wonder that it inspired rumors. To the town residents, the mere existence of such a lavish and out-of-place mansion on top of the hill was a cause for suspicion. Rumors, lies, and slander were the prices to be paid for fame. With only 2 lodgers, it was hard to disagree with the perception that vampires must be living here.
ま、私はともかく、アリスはそういうのやりかねないし。
She put her hand on the front door. It was a grand double door that would have paired well with a brass lock, and yet it was secured with little more than a simple keyhole. Pushing it open with one hand, she entered the supposedly haunted house. And by the way, if vampires were not enough to scare you, ghosts were known to appear on certain nights. Much like the weather outside, the floor was overcast with shades of gray. Perhaps by deliberate design, the architect had chosen not to include any lights in the entrance area. The ceiling was 2 floors high. The only light in the room came from the skylight. It was particularly gloomy on rainy days. On moonless nights, it was like the world itself ceased to be. Ako decided the drawing room to the east would be a good place to rest, but knowing that she would not be able to relax until she changed clothes, she started up the stairs. The stairs curled all up the walls to the second-floor hall. There was a third-floor attic as well, accessible from the far end of the hall. She had never set foot in there in the 2 years she had lived here, though. The Kenoji mansion was more or less divided into two wings, east and west. Akko had been given the entire east wing, but two rooms were more than enough as far as she was concerned. She had no desire to open a door that would trap you in a storybook world or lead to an attic that had only been used for storage these last 5 years. Akko's room was at the end of the east wing's long corridor. She had elected for a smaller room for no other reason other than that she thought it would be easier to clean. It was furnished with a large bed, her beloved mahogany desk, a wardrobe, and a chest for her clothes, and two 9-shelf bookcases. That was the extent of what she brought from home. Her entire life of 16 years reduced to this. She also borrowed the next room down for her own purposes.
そうだ。アリスにもらった見張りと壊れてないかチェックしないと。
Watchtower. Why are we referencing the Watchtower? She needed to see if the project she had been working on all night had borne fruit. The study next door served as proof of the life she had been living for the last year, and how different that life was from the one she had lived before. It was not a room for a person she had been. It was a room for the person she would eventually become, a place of solitude that only she could enter, or so she
う
thought.
わ、壊れてるどころか跡形もなく消え去ってる。やっぱ自己流アレンジはまだ早かったか。いいわよ。笑いなさいよ、コマドリ。
The noisy neighbor that had intruded upon her sanctuary flew away. While not especially talented, Aoko did not lack for effort and was not afraid to fail. One could have almost mistaken her approach for optimism. She changed out her uniform and returned to the first floor. Down the stairs, she opened the door to the east ring into the corridor as dark as a cellar. The absence of windows meant it was pitch black without the lights on, so she flicked the switch and entered the nearby doorway.
電気のない生活か。想像したくないな。
It had been her idea to update the drawing room. The walls were decorated with extravagant patterns, and around the room was large, majestic sofas and a luxurious Persian rug. Amidst it all was a 30-inch television that seemed completely out of place. Oh my gosh, most people nowadays aren't going to realize how big 30-inch TVs used to be. Now I remember my 24-inch box TVs. Uh, yes, what? You're the one that woke up. You were sleeping. Hey, that's my foot you're biting there. No, no bite my foot. I stood looking over the other furniture like an emperor with no clothes. Okay, YouTube notification this time. The mansion's owner would have rather done without it, but to a commoner like Aoko, it was an essential commodity. They had fought over its presence at first, but eventually came to an agreement and now mutually enjoyed its modern comfort.
なんだ、人のことは言えないか。うちも案外時代錯誤な家だった。
Now, in a somewhat pleasant mood, she decided to brew some tea. Now, I might make some tea later. She boiled some water in the kitchen, prepared a teapot, and made herself some black tea. Black tea. Or have green tea. Come on now. With a flop, she sank into the sofa. She took a sip of her tea, then another. Why are you biting things today? Why? Stop it. Lulled by the ticking of the clock, she took a third sip as she pondered how to spend her afternoon. The sofa almost seemed to be inviting her, and she sank even farther into its comforting embrace. Aoko barely opened her eyes as she lifted her body up from the cushion. Must be Alice there. This was no dream or delusion. At some point, a girl had sat across from her. Not the least bit surprised, she reached for her teacup. And the, but tea. God damn it. Of course, my cat wants attention. Yeah, okay, you guys are still able to hear me. I want to make sure on that. But the tea within had gone completely cold. She asked a question to the girl on the other side of the table. The girl answered without lifting her gaze. My cat is trying to eat plastic. Stop it. I want to say that's Alice. When silent, she could have been mistaken for a beautiful doll. The girl sitting on the opposite side was reading an old book. She had delicate limbs and pale white skin. Not a hint of humanity emitted from her melanotic aura. She had darker hair than Aoko, and her icy eyes were focused on the pages in front of her. Her clothes resembled that of a nun, but were actually her school uniform. In Ako's opinion, the gloominess suited her. She invoked something like out of a painting. There was something unreal about her, as if she were frozen in time. The white of her gently arched neck. My cat is trying to cause trouble right now. Stop it. Wait. Jeesh. Was so lovely that even Akko found herself enchanted by it. The girl was the. Stop. What are you trying to? Oh, I see what you're trying to attack. That is not for you to attack. That shouldn't be down where you can get to it. Gonna have to move that bit. Cat's trying to attack internet cables right now. There, now he's not able to get to it. The girl was one of the haunted house's 2 residents. Her name was Alice Kanoji, and she was the same age as Akko.
私どれくらい寝てた
1時間と少し。ここで眠ると風邪ひくわよ。
Alice answered indifferently, not that about Aoko, who was now used to it. She looked at the clock on the wall and saw it was already 7. She had been asleep for 2 hours. The day had been a rough one for her, and she had slept little the night before, so it was no surprise that she had dozed off for as long as she had.
起こしてくれてもよかったのに、せっかくの紅茶が冷めちゃったじゃない。
私が来た時はもう冷めてたわ。
でしょうね。行ってみただけよ。
Aka drank down the rest of the cold tea in one gulp. In the poorly heated Kanoji mansion, that was more than enough to clear her head and
こ
wake
う
up.
なると、フォートナム&メイソンも何もないわね。
Yeah,
おかえ
what?
り、アリス。玉の贅沢もあんた抜きじゃ閉まらないってことかしら。
Why are you hiding in corners? Give me a minute, my cat wants to act up right now. Oh, what happened? What? Come on, out. Out. Ow, I just hit my head. I know what you want. Sit. Okay, the you and okay, she already said all that.
今日は薬日か天中殺か。ちょっと早いけど、お参りってのも十分ありかもね。
Ako shrugged her shoulders as if resigning herself to her fate.
それで何があったの？
Their 2 years together, they knew each other quite well. Ako had one way of asking questions, and Alice had another. Alice asked without raising her head, and Ako gave her the details.
まず謝らなくちゃいけない。昨日徹夜で完成させた例のあれ、意味がなくなっちゃったのよ。ちょっと目を離した隙に沸騰しすぎて壊れちゃったみたい。そうならないよう循環のコードを 2,3 本外したり縫合したりしたんだけど。
Ako tried to laugh it off as if it was someone else's problem.
どういうこと？
今朝休養が入って学校に呼び出し受けたの。そこで転入生の世話を押し付けられて一日が無残にも消費されちゃって、帰ってきたら跡形もなく消えてました。怒る？アリス。
別に。青子の器物破損にいちいち怒っていたら一生分の口論をすることになるでしょ。代用品はあるからまた一から始めればいいわ。それより怒ってるのはあなたの方じゃないの？
There it is. Alice was very much on point today. It was true that despite outward appearance, Ako was seething with frustration. That aside,
この転入生っていうのがひどくずれててね。すごい山奥で暮らしてたらしくて、こっちの常識が通じないんだから。三問以下って言葉があるけど、あれって本当のことなのね、アリス。
Alice raised her head in response to hearing her name. But Ako kept going on before she could get a word. And edgewise, Ako, after a while, expected no sympathy in the first place.
あ、うん、ありがとう。
Alice
初対面から尺に触るやつだったけど、教室を案内した時なんか失神しそうになったわ。そいつ教室で教師と1対1で授業を受けるもんだと思ってたらしいの。ええ、それはそれでまだ流せる。で、私が簡潔かつ丁寧に教室の何たるかを教えた後で、そいつなんて言ったと思う？それで青崎、他の教室は何に使うんだですって。教室に他も何もないでしょ。なんていうか、そいつは少しでも説明を怠るとそのままで納得しちゃうのよ。何も疑問に思わないというか、想像力が欠如してるっていうか、想像することに慣れてないっていうか。まあ一度言ったことはちゃんと分かってるっぽいからバカってわけじゃないんだけど。
あなたが人を批評するのは珍しいわね。そういうダメな人気にするたちだったの？
みじんたりとも気にしないわよ。けど明日からどんな間違いをしでかすのかちょっと心配なだけ。
What she was really worried about was having to clean up that mess if and when it happened. That had to be it. If not, it would mean she had no real idea why she could not get him out
と
of
にかく
her
変な
head.
やつなの。
Wow, that's another
案
typo.
外アリスと気が合うかも。
三問一回はいい言葉ね。
But from her eyes, it was clear that the question was whether they would get along was irrelevant given that they would never meet in the first place. Aoko gave a non-committal response.
ところでアリス、さっきから何読んでるの？
霊的進化論の二次創作、スピリチュアルダイアリのまがいもの。
ああ、スウェーデンボリー。そんなの今更読んでも仕方ないんじゃない？
新書なら退屈だけど、これは義書だから。彼の欠点と長所を劇的に褒め上げている。よくできた冒険小説のようよ。立ちはだかる秘密組織の名前がカントとか気が利いているわ。筆跡はあなたのおじいさんのものだけど。
へえ、あの人そういう趣味まであったんだ。割とユーモアがあったのね。惜しい人を亡くしたわ。
Aoko seemed nostalgic over her now deceased grandfather.
あなたのおじいさん、夏に頼りをくれたけど。
よしてよ、死んだものと考えたいのに。
Aoko sighed and laid back on the sofa. The sofa cushions caved in under her weight.
話は戻るけど。
Alice shot a glance at Aoko. Her body, buried in the sofa, remained as still as a corpse. It was clear Aoko had turned out of the conversation. Alice silently chastised her with a look. The more she thought about it, the less important the events of the day seemed to become. If she just ignored Alice, the conversation would end there. They would eventually get up and leave today's mistakes unresolved for another day. However, that's not the kind of person Aoko Ozaki was.
いいわよ。何？
She is still lying down.
今日できなかったのは少し痛いわね。
だから反省してるって。学校優先は一人前になってからでしょ。
ならいいけど。
There's the mention of magecraft again. The coldness in her voice made Aoko gnash her teeth. She knew what Alice wanted to say. She knew better than anyone. The veneer she wore for school was different than the way she lived at home. While it could be called hiding in plain sight, Alice thought it was silly. And what the silence told her was,
覚悟を決めろって言いたいのよね、あんたは。
today's failure was not a colossal one. She just happened to upset the delicate balance between her home and school lives, chasing one at the expense of the other. and yet that careless mistake was a clear sign of Ako's lack of commitment.
アリスは関係ない。これは私が私で決めなくちゃいけないこと。
She had only known for sure for the last year and a half, but she had a hunch that for as long as she could remember, make the choice and the day will come. It was little wonder that her morals and conscience had been stripped away. Akko pushed herself back up. She was met by Alice's cold beauty and wordless gaze.
オッケー、アリス。来週中に決着をつけよう。それでいいんでしょ？
ええ、青子がいいなら。
Akko could not help but shake her head, feeling that she was hearing something similar for the second time that day. Even in the comfort of her own, she couldn't banish thoughts of that country boy from her mind.
じゃあ下準備はよろしくね。私まだできないし。
場所は例の公園でいい？
妥当な線ね。あ、でももう一軒の方は？そっちの方が急務じゃない？
時と場合、森に変化があれば教えるわ。
After that brief exchange, Alice returned her attention to the book on her lap. Shop talk was over. Now they could return to their normal relationship as roommates. Aoko grabbed the remote and turned on the TV. Since Alice was busy reading, Aoko decided to tune in to a variety show that had already started. Alice started to speak but suddenly cut herself off. One of her delicate hands raised to her mouth. She would always cut herself off the second she realized she was about to say something trivial. Sometimes her self-restraint would hit too late and she would make a gesture like the one she was making now. It occurred to Aoko that the ah sound her cute little roommate made just now was different than what she blurted out in times past.
何？
Aoko turned down the volume of the TV. Her intense eyes lit up with those of a
ど
mischief
う
cat.
ということはないんだけど。
ないんだけど？
Alice looked away bashfully, not knowing if she should bring it up or not. It was times like these that her expression carried a real warmth and surprising charm. If he could see her in this moment, Alice's father would have to admit that her name suited her perfectly.
今日、帰ってくるときおかしなものを見て、誰かに話そうと思っていたんだけど。
Oh no. Aoko nodded, beckoning her to continue.
つまらない、本当に意味のないことよ。けど、どう考えてもそんなことをする理由がわからない。青子、人間ぐらいの大きな猫がひょこひょこ出前をする理由ってわかる？
For a second, Aoko thought Alice was trying and failing miserably to make a joke again. One would think that about anyone, really. But she seemed completely serious. Even if Alice's sense of humor fell flat for Aoko, this story already sounded more factional than Alice's usual attempt at jokes. Aoko concluded that her roommate was talking about something she had actually seen.
その話には2つぐらい信じがたい部分があるけど、1つずつ論破していい？
いいの。私もからくりぐらいは思いつくから。ただ、理由がわからないから聞いてるの。わざわざ精巧な猫のぬいぐるみを着て、出前のてんやものを届けに行くことって、そんなに簡単かしらね。
難易度以前に、それをやる人間の常識性を疑うけどね、私は。
Alice nodded attentively at her
まあ、
words.
世の中いろいろあるから。私たちみたいなのもいれば、下界から遮断された山奥で暮らしていたやつまで10人十色よ。私だったら見かけたら声かけて理由を尋ねただろうけど。
Alice's gaze drifted at that.
暮れゆく住宅街にさまよう出前猫か。で、今日の夕飯どうする？せっかく話が出たし、私らもてんやものにしようか。
Aoko loved getting takeout, and her face glowed as she spoke. They had no hard rules for dinner, but if one of them was in the mood to cook, they made it the point to make enough for two. At the very worst, this meant entire weeks without dinner, but the two of them agreed that this was the system that worked best for them. Whether they found cooking to be too much effort or simply liked ordering out, nights like this one were a common occurrence, much to the chagrin of the restaurants in Misaki Town. Delivering to the management coming all the way up to the top of the hill, the source of their
時
disgruntlement.
間は8時前。ギリギリセーフね。私今月がいいな。あそこの月見そば最近ご無沙汰だったし。
The hungry student council president laid out a stack of takeout menus, like she might fan a deck of cards, and excitedly scanned for anything that stood out. Alice casually responded without sparring so much as a glance.
悪いけど私夕飯済んでるの。
With those words, Aoko froze. All deliveries required a minimum of 2 items. She was out of luck without an accomplice. Cruel society had decided it couldn't be bothered to deliver to a princess who only ordered a single serving of food. Instantly, to counteract orders from the Hilltop Mansion, the restaurants had declined. The minimum number of orders will be 3 starting next year. Aoko and Alice were still in the dark to this fiendish change in direction.
この裏切り者だから帰ってくるのが遅かったのね。帰宅部、学校までバス徒歩込みで片道20分のあんたがなんで5時以降に帰ってくんのか考えるべきだったわ。
Unfortunately for Aoko, she had been too out of it even to remember that she was the one who'd fallen asleep.
ああ、ひどい女。そういう時は残された一人のためにお土産買ってくるのが暗黙の了解だったのに。私だってこの前の外食の時はアリスの分も買ってきたじゃない。
It was unknown how serious Aoko was being, but she was visibly angry. She had already woken up hungry that morning, and from the time she was called to school until now, she had consumed nothing but tea. It was a small miracle that her stomach was not growling. She knew it was her own fault, but she persisted, wanting to get revenge on Alice for scolding her earlier.
この前ってあれのこと？あなたが都心に出向いた時、夕食にお寿司を食べてきたのに、お土産はなぜかコンビニエンスストアのビニール袋だったって話？
Aoko had kicked a hornet's nest.
何よ、買ってこないよりはマシでしょ。
真実は時に隠蔽すべきね。
Alice's icy glaze pierced right through her. Aoko had certainly crossed the line by going on and on about how the sushi circled around the restaurant while Alice ate her convenience store food. But new things fascinated her, and she couldn't contain her curiosity toward the conveyor belt sushi shops that started popping up. They were nothing short of miraculous. Miraculous. Even honestly can be a sin given the right circumstances.
わかった。わかりました。じゃあ今回のは前のと帳消しってことでいいわね。
Alice went back to her book without so much as recognizing the question. The fact that she did not confirm it made Aoko anxious.
仕方ない。今日は薬日だし、おとなしく台所に立って料理の腕を磨くとしましょう。
She stood up, announcing her intent to no one in particular.
聞き忘れてた。アリス、どこで夕食済ませたの？
Alice's hand froze on her current page. She suddenly shut the book she was reading and stood up as if at wit's end. She walked across the drawing room with her book in hand. When she reached the door, she stopped and turned towards Aoko.
聞きたい。
まあ。
Aoko nodded timidly, cowed by Alice's sudden vigor. Alice continued in her matter-of-fact way.
その猫が余ったメニューをくれたのよ。
And with that brief response, she left the room. And now we're headed on to the second chapter. 2 hours for a chapter is not that bad. That's even with me stopping, getting a drink, and dealing with my cat. Oh, this is actually. I'm actually glad I did choose to throw this into the mix with all the other games. That's one good thing is I do enjoy visual novels because they do entice you into them. Only sad thing is when everything's not voiced, reading it does kill your throat. And I can already feel mine going. So we're going to go ahead and end this session. Here at least, yes, we're going to save. I just noticed that part. Bookmarks. Oh, that's how you. Okay, it's like it's. So they have this set up as if we were actually reading an actual book. You can probably bookmark a spine. It'll do a quick save or something. Yeah, because that's what it is. Place bookmarks. So it'll take another spot. And there's only wow. Okay. Oh, they're not chapters, they're episodes. Okay. And what's the archive? Okay. Oh, the ah. So that's how it's set up. Because now this is chapter 1.5, which is where we're about to be. Okay. That gets a little bit more detail on that. As I said, we're going to go ahead and end this session here. We will jump it, or we'll actually go do more next time.